Welcome back to the Treksperts Briefing Room, where industry professionals curate audio commentaries with the creators, creatives, and diehard fans of the Star Trek franchise. This is Peter Holmstrom. I'm a screenwriter of a sci-fi television show, Pandora, as well as the author of The Center Seat, 55 Years of Star Trek, the companion book to the hit documentary series by the Nacelle Company, in stores right now.
And I'm Lisa Klink. I was a writer on Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Voyager, and I have a short story out in the first issue of Star Trek Explorer magazine.
Today, we are coming to you live from virtual TrekCon and an in-depth conversation about the season 2 premiere of The Next Generation, The Child, and more specifically, its origins as a script for the unproduced Star Trek television series from the 70s, Star Trek Phase 2. Yes, the script originally starred Kirk, Zahn, and McCoy, and we'll be discussing a bit of the history of Phase 2 and comparing and contrasting the Phase 2 script with the finished TNG product. Joining us here on this voyage are currently one of our favorite guests, but hopefully another guest will be joining us shortly. He is the, excuse me, I lost my place. He runs the Eagle Moss Star Trek collection, which produces some of the best Starship miniatures out there, as well as a nonfiction writer and co-wrote the books on Star Trek Voyager, A Celebration, and recently released Star Trek, the original series, The Celebration. Ben Robinson, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
As we wait for our next guest, I thought we'd take a minute here for both, Ben, Lisa. I think like all of us, we first experienced Star Trek in such an interesting way. We did it on television, often in syndication, where you could exist and you could watch these things in kind of a bubble, right? In the pre-Twitter, pre-internet days. It seems like now you can't enter anything without hearing something about it. But for me, I know I watched The Child from The Next Generation for the first time, and it was just part of the pantheon of Star Trek. I wonder if you guys could think back and think about like, what was your first reaction to the show when you were watching it for the first time?
Well, I'm sure that I was watching it in the commons room of my dorm at Duke University. We would always get together. Everybody in the dorm would get together for Next Generation. So I'm sure that was my first experience of watching The Child.
For me, it would have been on VHS. Being English, we had to wait for the VHS release, which came, I think, 6 months after broadcast, something like that. So you'd get 2 episodes on a tape. God, this is so 20th century. But then of course you would at least be able to go and watch it straight away again afterwards if it was good, or maybe a little later if it wasn't so good.
We've heard tell that the British censors cut out quite a number of things from the VHSs.
Oh, not that many. There's a reference to the unification of Ireland. That was, oh no, we can't have that. That went. There is some of the stuff from Conspiracy. They showed it once and then they went, oh God, that's scary. We better not show that again. So that was all the Remick blowing up stuff. What else did they censor? My favorite VHS thing was that the cover for one of the stories had a picture of the Dalai Lama on. Yeah. And you're like looking at it going, who are these aliens in this episode? And then when you realize it was just that the Dalai Lama had visited the set and they picked the pictures up and used it had no connection to the episode whatsoever.
Amazing. It's so funny when you think back to about how many famous people came to visit the set of Star Trek. I mean, Ronald Reagan, Colin Powell, Stephen Hawking. I mean, these were people who just, Star Trek was quite a phenomenon for a time. But it is really interesting when you think back to season 2 about how the show was still finding itself, and it's coming out right after or in the midst of a WGA strike. So there was this kind of pressure on them to both create, but also to cement themselves as premier science fiction property. And obviously Paramount had given them kind of a soft green light for 2 seasons. So this was also the time of being like, all right, we still have to earn a 3rd season here. So they go into the vaults for the season 2 premiere and find the script for Phase 2, The Child, and decided to do a big adaptation of it. Ben, I mean, I would love to talk a little bit about the history of Phase 2. I think it's a chapter of Star Trek that gets a little forgotten in a way, obviously because it never got produced. But for our listeners who aren't familiar with it, we're talking here about the mid 1970s. Star Trek, the original series, had been canceled in 1969 due to lackluster ratings, let's say, and a rather high budget, which both NBC and Paramount just couldn't really continue to justify. But then within a few years, they both realized that Star Trek is a literal bank or a mint that's of printing money. I wonder, and they wanted to bring it back. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just how really rare that was, this notion of like, let's bring back a television show and kind of that internal justification for doing so.
Yeah, I don't think it happened at all. I can't think of anything that had come back before then. I guess there's like Return of the Saint around about the same time.
That's true.
So yeah, but that was like a second generation, I guess, new cast. I mean, what happened, as I understand it, is Star Trek goes into syndication and it's getting these really, really good ratings for syndication. And then way back when, even then, there's talk of starting a fourth network. And the idea is they wanted this anchor show for the network, and Star Trek, there was demand for more. So they got Gene to come back. He assembled a staff. And they got most but not all of the cast. So Leonard at the time, this is Leonard Nimoy, obviously, everybody said, oh, he didn't want to do it. I talked to him and he said, well, they didn't offer me enough money. He didn't quite put it that way. He said they didn't give me everything that I wanted. They wouldn't give me what I wanted. So the show would have had a different Vulcan, this character Zon, who I still think David Gautreaux, who was cast in the role, is the perfect guest star for any series of Star Trek. I don't understand why it hasn't happened. Decker, who Stephen Collins had not been cast. So there was, the character existed. And Decker is quite like Riker. He's meant to be this kind of captain in training, but obviously his relationship is with Kirk rather than with Picard. And then Ilea, they had cast Persis Kambata. And the Deltans, we never really got to see enough of, but they were meant to be like the emotional equivalent of the Vulcans. So they were like the other end of the spectrum from the Vulcans, and meant to be so kind of emotionally sophisticated, and Gene being Gene, sexually sophisticated as well. We'll talk about Ilea a little bit in the script, because this is like her feature script.
Is it? Yeah. And if a lot of these names sound familiar to the listeners out there, the work done on phase 2 gradually transitioned over to the motion picture. The notion was, a number of things happened, but one of them being that Star Wars came out and Paramount suddenly realized that there was a lot of money to make in science fiction on cinema, but also the plans for a fourth network kind of went away. So there was a thought that like, okay, we can still do this, but let's do a motion picture first to kick things off, and then we'll transition into phase 2 as an ongoing television show. Because even in that time, the notion of sequels was rare, right? So like work on phase 2 continued even as the motion picture was getting prepared.
Yeah, they'd done quite a lot of work for it. So they built sets, which then got upgraded for motion picture. They actually built a different version of the Enterprise. So Matt Jeffries came back and did some upgrades, and Brick Price had built a model, which got upgraded again for motion picture. But there's some test footage out there. And they commissioned, they had 13 stories and gone into serious development. And I can't remember how many scripts there actually are, something like 9, I think, actual scripts.
About 9 or 10, yeah.
Yeah, and then I've got pitches for some stories that they hadn't bought that they were still working on. So it was pretty full on. In some ways, it was in better shape than TNG was halfway through the first season. It was. It's quite tight. It's an interesting missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, and a lot of, as I said, a lot of the names do carry over. Harold Livingston was on as kind of the creative producer, what today we would call a showrunner, a writing showrunner. Gene Roddenberry was there as kind of the overseeing executive producer. John Povell, who wrote this script, was also worked on the motion picture, and erroneously came up with the at least claims that the story goes that he came up with a solution for the motion picture of Decker needs to join with the creator when he was hanging out on set and extremely high. But
I was reading through some notes before we did this, and apparently the original way to get rid of Vija was that Kirk drew a picture of a droopy daisy, and he was like, "Look, it's terrible, but it's still art." And that kind of Vija went, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's the nature of creativity." So they never really liked that ending, which is why John spent so much time trying to come up with something else.
That's amazing. Lisa, I mean, chime in here. Do you recall when you first heard of Phase 2? Like, it is kind of a weird chapter of Star Trek history. Was it something that was ever talked about in the Voyager writers' room, or?
Well, that is where I first heard about it, was when I was on Voyager, but it was this like apocryphal thing. I wasn't sure that it even had really existed, or if it was something that maybe the fans had made up. So I really didn't know too much about it. But I knew that it had some connection to Star Trek the Motion Picture, some of the characters, bleeding over and that sort of thing. So I think that's why I thought that maybe it was not a real project in its own.
Yeah, one of my favorite little tidbits that I learned because of the Inglorious Treksperts podcast, which is our sister show, is that they had done like a series of newspaper strip stories for Star Trek based off Star Trek Motion Picture for a few years, and they're fantastic. Like, anyone should go buy them. There's 2 great hardcover editions of them out there right now. But for like the first 5 or 6 stories, like Ilea and Decker are still there on the bridge in the background because they still hadn't, at the time of the publication, like, nobody knew how the movie was going to end. And so they were like, yeah, sure, they're part of the cast now going forward, obviously. Like, put them on the Enterprise. And then mysteriously they just vanish, because the motion picture and Star Trek as a whole at the time was just such in a state of like flux, and things were constantly changing, right? And it looks like we have our second guest here. Fantastic. We will pause now for station identification.
So Ben, you said that you had some of the original pitches.
Yeah.
How did you get hold of that?
Paramount or CBS requested them for another project, and I can't remember why. I was talking to them about doing something with it. I've always had this kind of secret yearning to get these stories made. I would love for someone to do them as audio dramas. You can just imagine, because there are scripts. I mean, these are Gene Roddenberry scripts.
Right.
These are like first, second draft scripts that are fully approved by Gene. A lot of the cast, you could easily see who you could replace. I mean, Shatner could still come out and be Kirk. Nobody better to be Kirk, however much there are new people doing it. And, I'm sure we could get Ethan Peck to come along, and actually no, we need Zon. We could get David Galtroy to be Zon.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're there to be done. I think that's why I got them. I can't remember now. I've just been fascinated by it, because I just love stuff that isn't quite what happened. Road Not Taken, parallel universes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know what I find so fascinating reading through this script and reading through some other scripts, and also listeners out there, if you'd like to learn more about Phase 2, this script, as well as the pilot script for Image, was published in a great book called Star Trek. I'm holding up the book right now it's not coming in through my background, but never mind. It's called Star Trek Phase 2, The Lost Series. It's written by Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens, who also wrote on Enterprise. And it's a really great book, very full of just fascinating behind the scenes images. And it publishes the scripts for both the pilot in the Image and then the script for this book, or this episode we're here to talk about today. But Ben, you obviously have read more material. It's interesting for me reading through a lot of the scripts and material for Phase 2, the sort of tonal differences between it and the original series. To hit the nail on the head. Is Jonathan with us? Nope,
he is, but he can't hear us.
Apparently. There's 2 of him.
There's an episode of Phase 2 pitch where someone gets turned into triplicate. There is.
That's one we want to see. Jonathan, we still can't hear you. All right. Well, anyway, Ben, I'll ask you this though, because like reading through this stuff, it to be blunt about it, Kirk's not that sexy in this series.
They were, you know what? One of the reasons that Decker exists is because they were worried that at 40, Kirk would be too old to play the leading man.
And tonally, it does sort of is more reminiscent of the motion picture, right? There's these weird kind of splashes of sexuality in them, but then they pull back instantly and it's back to just kind of military talk, right? And like Ilea here in this script, we'll talk about it as we get into it, but there's these like, it's a little tonally, it's a little funky. It feels much more like there's a 70s influence of kind of like the neo-noir, almost nihilism of everything. Like we're just here to talk about our military aspects. And then there's just these like splashes of like one character who's like, dancing in the corridors or something.
I guess. I mean, I think it's, you have to remember that this one particular, this is a first draft or a second draft, I think, actually. So I think when they'd got going a little bit, then maybe they would have had a bit more of a sense of the tone. I mean, the thing I would level at them, a criticism I would level at them, is kind of the same as for the first season of TNG, where they're like retreading ideas from the original series. So there's a character who's very like Trelane. There's there are storylines that kind of like just feel a bit too familiar in some of the scripts, but then there are also, I mean, the standout story is a 2-part story called Kitumba, which is John Meredith Lucas's kind of Star Trek meets Shogun storyline, where they have to go into they go deep undercover in the Klingon Empire to try and protect this child emperor who has ascended to the throne, and all these warlords are trying to sort of manipulate things and take over. So, but they're very different to one another, the scripts. I think there's no kind of clarity about what the show is at this point.
I mean, Kitumba is fantastic too. It's also a complete reinvention of what the Klingons are. Like we read it today and we're like, oh, half their race are just like techno cybernetic, but because at that point we remember that like Star Trek hadn't been as defined as it is today. And reading through this script, I don't think there'll be any moments of that during our readings, but there's plenty of instances where they're referring to, variations of warp speed as we would think of it as being variations of impulse drive, but they're just throwing in like warp speed 5 and all this stuff as if, because the terms just weren't really defined yet, and it's something they're still very much working on. But Jonathan, can we hear you? Can you speak? Nope, apparently not. Okay.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
There we go.
Is that better?
Hello.
We can hear you.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. It's like literally back to dial up here. How is everyone? Are you okay?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for joining us. For our listeners out there, Jonathan is the fiction editor for Star Trek Explorer magazine, which is a fantastic publication through Titan Publishing, and he's also a editor at large over there at Titan, and also just a fantastic human being.
Well, yes. Just thank goodness I don't work in IT. Is all I'll say.
Jonathan, we talked a bit about the child and as well as phase 2 in its history, but just to play catch up here a little bit, do you recall seeing the TNG episode of the child when it first came out, and like what your initial reactions to it were?
Yeah, my initial reaction was, what a weird way to start a season of TV, especially Star Trek. It's such a strange setup. It feels like such a mid-season episode that it was. I couldn't quite believe. I thought, watching it on the initial UK run, I thought, there's another episode that we're not allowed to see over here. Obviously, there was a real barnstorming, slightly controversial season opener that, didn't make it over here. But no, it's a very odd episode. It's nice to see Marina Sirtis given a storyline, a bit more, especially like we've all read that she was pretty sure she was going to be fired at the end of the season before. But it's kind of a shame that it's never mentioned again. It's an episode that happens and then everyone moves on. I guess that's the nature of TV at that point, but it feels like something like that would have had far-reaching consequences for her as a character. But also, of course, with Marie de Curtis, I cannot. I mean, I think she's a phenomenal actress, because it was only years and years later I heard her talking in her London accent, and whenever I watch it, I really watch any Star Trek now with her in it. I really wish there was a version where we could hear her talking in her regular voice. It would be very unusual for Trek.
It's a fantastic accent. I'm never quite sure why they wanted it to be changed. Because it's also like, what is the accent? Anyway, I'm not entirely sure. It's kind of British.
Betazoid, obviously.
North London Greek. North London Greek. That's what Marina is. I'll tell you.
But yeah, that's a good transition point to talk a bit about kind of what the broad strokes differences are between the phase 2 script and the TNG episode. For listeners out there, we're going to do a little bit of scene readings here in a moment, where we'll talk more about specifics of the episode. But broad strokes, in the TNG episode, the case of the week aspect is that there is this virus on this planet, and the crew of the Enterprise have to transport this big crates of genetic material to this other planet so that a vaccine can be made, right? I kind of thought of it a bit as like, oh, it's like a smallpox, one of these kind of you hear about like the Soviet or even American, the CDC labs, and they have to take one of these very dangerous materials and transport it over here. Elsewhere on the Enterprise, an alien entity has impregnated Deanna Troi, and an accelerated pregnancy and growing period means that this male boy goes from inception to teenager in less than a few days. Eventually, this big crate of dangerous tech begins to degrade, and the whole ship is threatened. The boy, Ian, claims that this is his fault, and he leaves, and heartache ensues from there. In the phase 2 script, it's a similar setup, but the major difference is each act involves a number of kind of mini catastrophes that threaten the Enterprise. And the child in this story, whose name is Urska, the daughter of Ilea, is the only one who can solve the problems. The mystery and the engine of the episode is less about like, what is this child, and more about like the incidental problems that we know are never really going to damage anyone anyway, but are nevertheless there for this one child to solve. I mean, for everyone here, Jonathan, Ben, Lisa, I mean, was there anything broad strokes when you reviewed the script that struck you as like, wow, this is actually super different than the finished episode?
I don't know if it was super different, but something that really struck me was that in the phase 2 version, we really got to see Ilea as a mother in a somewhat different way than your average human. And so we got to learn a little bit more about the Deltan race. Whereas in the Next Generation version, Troi was basically a human mother. We didn't really get to see what a Betazoid, or Beta Z mother would be like. I mean, if you think about her own mother, Loxana, you can't imagine her being like the average, suburban mom. But it seemed like Deanna sort of was. So I thought that was a missed opportunity to see a little bit more about her culture.
That's very true. It's very true.
I mean, for me, the big thing is structural. That the original script is much more focused. It's got this central thing of Urska is there. There's this bizarre cylindrical ship that's following the Enterprise and seems to be the thing that's posing all these dangers, and it's much more focused on that kind of jeopardy and in the central mystery of who is Urska, whereas the TNG episode has got all these different things it's got to accomplish. So it's like, oh, okay, here is introducing Dr. Pulaski, and Gaiman, course, yeah. And the new carpet. It just feels like, and I think it's something that happens in season 2 of TNG quite a bit, is that you get these kind of runner stories that just don't really contribute to the main story at all. They're quite soft and fluffy, and And soap opera, I mean, I love a bit of soap opera in my science fiction, but this is a bit kind of like, it's just, it doesn't all come together. It's not really tied together. There's a whole thing. The other thing is, the guidance storyline is Wesley's deciding whether to stay on the ship now that his mother has left, or everyone assumes he's going to leave, and ultimately he decides he wants to stay. Yeah. But I don't know, it just didn't feel very coherent. It's not all going to the same goal. Whereas the original script, I think, is much more focused, much cleaner.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think it's a kind of shame as well. Reading the original script, I'm going to put my cards on the table here. I find the Deltons very, very interesting, and there was never seemed to be much of an exploration beyond the motion picture of what. That whole thing, I've taken an oath of celibacy. It's such a Gene Roddenberry thing. It's such a
Gene and his oath of celibacy? I don't think so.
Well, no, but the idea of there is a species so sexually advanced that if they go near a human, that people will melt.
Yes.
And I think it's kind of strange. I've always wondered why they kind of steered away from. I kind of know why they steered away from that, because it's a PG-rated franchise. But it would. I think it bears more exploration. Put it that way.
It is heartbreaking from just watching the motion picture, just knowing that Decker is madly in love with Ilea, and Ilea even kind of loves him too. You get that sense a little bit, but like she just knows that like this will kill us both, and there's that kind of forbidden love aspect, which is really cool. Which you could say like that they tried to recreate that with Riker and Troy, which is something that I found we kind of miss in the Phase 2 script, is that like Decker is almost not there. Like he's there, but he's kind of not there at all. And yet in the Next Generation finished episode, Riker, you feel Riker's like jealousy, but also kind of like protective aspect. Like he's clearly struggling with his own emotions in that episode.
Well, the Decker Ilea romance only got introduced when it became motion picture. So it's not part of the original Bible for the series. She's just an exotic alien. A bald exotic alien with a headdress. So
gorgeous.
How do you define exotic, Ben?
There's a story. I don't know if I can tell the story about Alf Bennett going in and talking about when they asked him to do Star Trek 2, and he was like, "Did you see Star Trek the motion picture?" It's like, yeah. He didn't know what to say. This is Charlie Bloodhorn and Michael Eisner and those kind of people in the room, and he's like, he doesn't know what he's supposed to say. And they say, what did you think of it? And he goes, well, I thought it was kind of boring. And Bloodhorn turned to Eisner and said, see, by you bald is sexy.
Amazing. Well, let's get it right on in here to the scripts and do a quick scene reading. So for listeners out there, we're going to be reading the teaser. Ben, if you could do the role of Bernstein, and as well as what we talked about the other day. I'll be reading through the scene description. Lisa, if you could do Ensign Park and Ilea, and then Jonathan, if you could read the role of Lieutenant Zahn. All right. Okay. Fade in. Exterior Enterprise traveling through space. Interior bridge, wide angle. It's manned by a relief crew. Zahn in the command chair is the only familiar face. The atmosphere is relaxed, routine, almost bored. Then something makes Ensign Bernstein at the helm perk up a bit.
Something on the forward viewer, Mr. Zahn. Looks like a nebula.
Slow to warp factor 1, Mr. Bernstein. Sensor scan, Ensign Park.
Ensign Park, an attractive and efficient junior science officer, pushes a sequence of buttons in front of her and consults the hooded viewer for the results of the scan.
Not a nebula, sir. I'm picking up several kinds of energy. Radiation readings I've never seen before.
Put it on the viewer, Mr. Bernstein.
Bernstein hits some buttons. Then, angle viewer. As the swirling gaseous mass appears there, it has pulsing points of light within it that move almost like fish darting through water. Angle Bernstein.
We're heading right for it, Mr. Zahn.
Angle Zahn as he approaches Ensign Park at the science console.
No visible danger, sir. Radiation and electromagnetic readings all within our tolerance limit.
She steps out of the way, and Zahn looks into the hooded viewer briefly.
You're quite correct, Ensign. Force fields to manual. 0.85 deflection aspect. Take us through at warp 1, Mr. Bernstein. We'll survey and map it.
Exterior space as the Enterprise sails through the clouds of pulsing, swimming lights. Interior bridge, all is normal.
Cartography computer on and recording.
Exterior space as the Enterprise makes its way through the cloud, large pulses of white light glide past. Now one of them seems to change direction and follow along the ship for a while. Then a small section of the light ball breaks off as it begins traversing the outer skin of the ship. Abruptly, it disappears into the Enterprise. Interior, deck 17, crew quarters, as the light entity enters the empty corridor and passes through the wall into interior, Uhura's quarters. The light entity makes its way to the sleeping Uhura. It quickly scans the length of her body, then makes another pass, pausing first at her abdomen and then at her head. Uhura continues to sleep, but she stretches languorously as though the touch of the light on her body is sensual and pleasant. Then the light entity moves on, passing through another wall into interior Chekhov's quarters. Again, the light entity heads directly to the room's sleeping occupant and quickly scans over his body, making another closer pass. Chekhov also appears to enjoy the experience in the sleep as the entity surveys his abdomen. It does not explore his head and moves out again through another wall into interior Ilea's quarters. The same procedure occurs, only this time the entity seems to linger for a long time over Ilea's head. She too clearly enjoys the experience. The entity pulls away for a moment and hovers in the air over her, growing brighter and more animated. Then it plunges into her abdominal wall. Her body moves spasmodically, sexually, but she doesn't wake up. Her writhing continues until it reaches a peak during which her entire body seems to glow. Then the glow appears to gather itself at her head. Her body relaxes again. The glow becomes the light entity, which removes itself and goes through yet another wall into exterior Enterprise, still with the cloud, as the light entity from the hull of the ship and rejoins the large ball that has passed the ship. Interior corridor, deck 5. It is now brightly lit and abuzz with activity. Kirk strives cheerfully through in a swimsuit, a towel around his neck, hair dripping wet as Chekhov emerges from his quarters. Oh, I forgot about Chekhov. I'll read Chekhov. Nothing like a brisk swim in the ocean, eh, Captain? After they pass Ilea's compartment, the camera holds on Ilea's door as she emerges somewhat dreamily in a flowing Delton robe. Camera trucks with Ilea as she makes her way to the turbolift, exchanging dreamy ad-libs greetings with those who pass her. She enters the turbolift, interior corridor as Ilea proceeds to sickbay and enters. Interior sickbay. Ben, if you could play the role of McCoy, that'd be great. Interior sickbay. McCoy is there, just settling into the daily routine. He greets her warmly.
Good morning, Lieutenant. If you can call turning the lights up at 0800 hours morning.
Angle Ilea. She's extremely puzzled, dazed.
I don't understand it. I have not broken my vow, yet I can feel it inside me.
McCoy is worried now. He realizes something is wrong.
What, Lieutenant? What do you feel inside you?
Confused, groping for an explanation, she touches her fingers to the side of her head, somewhere above and behind the temples, and closes her eyes in meditation.
Last night, a pure white light. I don't know how beautiful.
She hesitates, uncertain, confused.
Ilea, please, try to make sense.
I'm pregnant, Doctor.
Fade out. End of teaser. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. Lisa, you're our resident expert Star Trek writer here. You've written a few teasers in your life. How does this stack up for you?
Well, I mean, it creates a tech mystery. What is this thing and what is it doing? I mean, it directs a lot in the script, what the actor is supposed to do exactly and what they're feeling. But again, that's part of kind of what the effect that this light being has. So I don't know. I thought it was, sort of your average teaser, just setting up the mystery.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things is like there's so many auxiliary cast involved. Like I don't know, maybe it's just the modern sensibilities of like we can't afford extras. Go ahead, but I was just like, my God, there's so many other people here that And Ben, having read the other scripts for phase 2, do you notice there was a conscious effort to maybe expand the world of the Enterprise beyond just the core 7 people?
I think the biggest thing actually is that it's more of an ensemble show. So you'll get like a Scotty show, you get an Ilea show, a Decker show, a Zon show, and the original series. I mean, I remember watching TNG and it's like, the original series was really just these 3 guys or 2.5 guys, and this is already moving into a different kind of space. I mean, I'm not sure whether all the kind of like the Bernsteins and the whoever would have become the kind of equivalent to Sulu or Chekhov. They were just like the extras who were always there. I think probably each writer was just making up their supporting cast for their episode. And things like just the fact that there is like a relief crew, that's like, okay. And you could say, why do we need it to be this way around? Why don't we just have everybody in their normal stations? But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a kind of some way towards TNG, I would say. It's different. It's not the original series.
Absolutely. And Jonathan, if you were reviewing this as a first few pages of a short story for your Star Trek Explorer magazine, pick it up now in stores. How would this stack up? Would you be like, keep reading, or would you just whoosh, over on to the next story? It sounds like the audio might be gone again from Jonathan.
No, that's okay. I was just I'd throw it straight in the bin. No, it's great. It's do you know what? It's an intriguing teaser. I think the thing with it is that you've got one of the main characters pregnant, and that can't stand. That's not going to be an ongoing thing in the show, because that would, I guess, compromise that character, or it would have done then, in an adventure series. Then if it was in maybe a modern day series, then that would be allowed to carry on and develop over the course of a season. So you kind of wonder how that is going to play out, which is intriguing, I think. But I'm quite curious about the character of Zon, even though I played him so terribly in that scene. It's a tough act to follow. Spock is, even at that point with, just 3 series of television, he was, an iconic character. So I'm really intrigued as to how that would have played out, or how that character would have gone down had the show gone ahead.
Zon's fascinating. So Zon is like prototype Data. So Zon is a full Vulcan who has decided that if he's going to serve with these humans, he has to try and experience emotion. So he's like the reverse of Spock, trying to suppress his emotions. So there's actually literally a scene like the one at the beginning of Schizoid Man when Data is practicing laughing. In which Zon is doing exactly the same thing. And David Gaucho had this fantastic thing. He said that his acting teacher gave him this note, was like saying, imagine that you are you're trying to just move the needle into a different groove on a record every time you're talking to the other people, that they just don't get it. I think Zon is, Zon's potentially really interesting. I guess so much just depending on how good David Gaucho would have been, Leonard Nimoy is a massively hard act to follow.
It is, but you do look at that test footage that's out there, and you're like, this could have worked really well. I mean, it was definitely a bit more of a Vulcan, in a way you could see it kind of being big hit with the fans. The Vulcan with ruffled hair and a little more
Michael York Vulcans.
Anyway, let's jump right into this next scene here then, because I see we're starting to run a bit short on time, but let's go right for this. It's the beginning of Act 2. We are on to page 13. We've set up a bit of the struggle of the episode. There's a silver cylinder that's out there. Ilea has now given birth to a daughter named Urska, and Urska is also now talking. So we open right here with Act 2. Ben, if you could go on playing Kirk, I'll be the role of Urska. And I think That's the ones we need to worry about. All right. Exterior space, Enterprise, and alien cylinder.
Captain's log, stardate something or other. A week has passed since the birth of Ilea's child and the appearance of the strange alien cylinder. Despite an ever-increasing white blood cell count, Urska remains healthy. Her stage of development is roughly that of a 10-year-old child. We remain unable to make contact with the alien cylinder or to determine why, or indeed how, it is following us.
Interior, Ilea's quarters. Without the occasional familiar piece of hardware, the viewer computer, library, console, the intercom, the doors, etc., it would be most difficult to determine that this room was on board the Starship Enterprise. It delights the senses. It is filled with exotic plants, cushions on the floor, walls covered in the soft, textured material, deep, richly saturated colors, smoke rising from an incense burner. Oh boy.
1975.
Yes, exactly. Various angles, Ilea and Urska. There's music playing, something like modern jazz, but played on totally alien sounding instruments. It must be something danceable, though, as mother and child are dancing, sensual and innocent, joyous. Movements perhaps related to Tai Chi. They whirl about. Diaphanous. I'm a writer. I know how to. I can spell words. Diaphanous flowing robes billowing, ending in a crescendo of laughing and waving arms, and the fingertips that occasionally brush each other's bodies as lightly as hair blowing in the wind. The music stops and they fall onto floor cushions, breathless. They recline, catching their breath until Ilea grows serious and turns to her daughter.
Today I resume my duties. That means we'll be apart for a time.
Can I go to work with you? I'm not going to use that voice again. Ilea reaches out and caresses the child's face, hair.
No, my work is my work. It is important that you spend some time alone now and become who you are to be.
Urska looks uncertain and somewhat frightened. Ilea soothes her now with both hands. But what will I do?
Learn. Do whatever you want to do. See if you can discover joyfulness alone. Once you have achieved that, you need never fear rejection.
Ilea embraces the child lovingly. Urska returns the warmth. They look at each other for a long moment. Are they communicating telepathically, or is it love? We do not know. Interior, Kirk's quarters. Ilea in uniform enters. Kirk, reading, looks at her, smiles.
I would like permission to resume my duties, Captain.
Kirk isn't sure. He wasn't expecting this.
What about your daughter?
She's busy, learning to have a good relationship.
Who with?
Herself, sir. The beginning of all good relationships. One must spend time alone to get to know oneself before being ready to share who you are with others.
Ilea, what are your plans for you and your daughter?
Plans, Captain? I have none. She is growing fast and will not be with me long. I must love her, teach her what I can, and then let her go.
Go where? To do what? Appearances to the contrary, she's not human, nor is she Deltan, or any other life form we know of. Will she be able to adjust to that aloneness?
Captain, she is my child. Even if we are physically separated, the bond between us is inseparable. You are more alone at any time than she is ever capable of feeling. Where she goes and what she does must be left up to her.
What if she were to pose some danger to...
She does not. She could not pose danger to anyone.
Kirk sees no point in trying to pursue the subject, though he remains less than fully convinced of her statement.
Have you any idea at all in what way your daughter might be connected with that cylinder out there?
No, Captain. I'm sorry, but I do not.
Very well, Lieutenant. Thank you. You may return to your duties.
Thank you, sir.
And scene. Well done. That was really good. I definitely want to make sure we get through the last scenes. Maybe we just jump into that one and then talk about both scenes afterwards as we start to wrap up, because I know we have a hard out here that we have to hit. So the next scene we're going to talk about is Act 4. We're in the days of the 4-act television structure, which is so lovely. And we're on page 41, scene 38. And we will just go right through there to the end of the episode. Okay. So for now, for the listeners out there, a lot of those kind of incidental problems I was talking about have come up, and Urska has been the one to solve them. One was a radiation surge throughout the entire crew of the Enterprise, and Urska's blood had the vaccine, shall we say, for the radiation poisoning. Another one was that there was a problem on the in the engine system, kind of reminiscent of Spock in Star Trek II. Urska was the only one who was resistant to the radiation and could go in and fix the problem.
She's very handy with a welding torch.
She's very handy. The small hands, they're great with that. All right, so we're just going to hop right on into this here.
I'm sorry, okay. Which scene was it?
I'm so sorry. Page 41, we're on scene 138.
Okay.
All right. Interior Ilea's quarters. Urska kneels before her unconscious mother. She takes Ilea's hand in hers and gently strokes it while watching her face intently. Ilea comes to and looks up at her daughter. Ilea's point of view, Urska. The child seems radiant with love. Ilea's hand seems to intertwine with Urska's. Close, Ilea and Urska, as the child lies down, cradled in her mother's arms. Their hands continue to move soothingly, as though they had minds of their own.
No need to be frightened. You've only felt pain.
Why must everyone feel pain?
Part of life. Sometimes it is how we understand.
Can you make me understand? What is cryontha? What cryontha is? Also, for listeners out there, cryontha, Ben, or I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? There's no pronunciation guide.
There's this weird runner throughout the series where the word cryontha keeps popping up, and there's kind of like a mystery of like, what is cryontha? I don't know. All right. What cryontha is?
It is inside your mind. You have to find it.
And if I don't, everyone will die.
Don't use your mind to find guilt. Direct your mind to discover what cryontha is.
Exterior space, Enterprise, and cylinder. The Enterprise remains enmeshed in the magenta energy field emanating from the cylinder. Interior bridge.
Mr. Chekhov, how much time?
7 minutes, 42 seconds, sir. Kirk punches a button on his chair.
Metallurgy. Lieutenant Haber, status report.
Jonathan, if you could do the random voices that we see here.
Whatever the energy field is, sir, it's operating on a subatomic level. I don't see much hope of finding an effective catalyzing agent.
Physics lab, Lieutenant Takawa, report.
We have no... Oh, I'm doing the voice. Oh, I'm the James Doohan of this.
You are the Jimmy Doohan.
All right, hang on. We've tried reverse gravity and a battery of magnetic field generators so far. No effects, sir.
Yours on too.
It's me.
Come on.
Come on. Talking to myself. Captain, the closest thing to Cryantha that the computer banks contain is Cryantha, which is a species of animal on Porgath 5.
Have you tried mathematical languages?
Yes, sir, with similar results. I have, however, also been reviewing the child's thoughts as I knew them when our minds were joined.
Point, Mr. Zahn, the point.
So I was meant to be Decker. Okay.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to be Decker.
Be Decker.
Okay, the point, Mr. Zahn, the point. I had the distinct impression that each of the calamities that befell the ship was designed to teach the child something about life and death and emotions I could not comprehend. There was a sensation of incompleteness, as though she was still evolving, and these were necessary steps in the process.
Cryantha, Mr. Zahn. What is Cryantha?
Cryantha is the key to the next stage of her development. Perhaps if I tried another mind meld, I could learn more.
Time, Mr. Chekhov.
5 minutes and 36 seconds.
Let's go, Mr. Zahn. We'll be in Lieutenant Ilea's quarters. You have the con.
All right, scene right there. I think because we're running a bit short on time, we'll wrap it up right there. Basically, the rest of the episode, Urska, it's revealed that Urska is a physical being, but coming from a non-corporeal physical form, and that the period of time we've seen here is a kind of a gestation period where like these beings have to live a physical life, understand what it means to exist in a physical plane, and then they can like ascend to their natural state, which is non-corporeal and the white orb things. And Ilea is left with very positive feelings of love and joy from the experience. Lisa, I mean, based, picking up on something you talked about earlier, really interesting to see kind of Ilea's parenting style too, which I was like, oh, that's actually a really refreshing take on this notion of like, you need to figure out how to love and live your own life, rather than just like emulating your parents' life, which I was like, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, she's definitely gearing the child toward becoming independent, and her, repeated saying that, you have to love yourself before you can love anybody else, I think is a nice message.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I mean, it's interesting thing. I wonder if we could talk a bit about the final comparing and contrasting between this script and the finished TNG episode. Jonathan, we talked a bit about it early on before you joined. But if you just want to pick up here with like how you compare the two.
I think it's fascinating to actually be able to compare the two. It's not, there can't be many examples of Star Trek scripts that started life as for one crew and ended up, being brought in for another.
Sure.
I've got to say, definitely, yeah, sorry.
That's next year's podcast.
Yeah, there we go. But I found this a really interesting one. I found the I love Star Trek the Motion Picture. I think it's a much underrated, and to see this crew or members of this crew, in their own adventure is really, it's a really interesting sidestep of what might have been, and maybe one day in the future we could do audio adventures of all these scripts, and we could play the characters. maybe not, screams Paramount at the top of their voices.
you just really want to use more of that Decker voice. I get it. It's
yeah.
I think one of the most interesting things for me is that like Kirk's role here is he's not the A story. I mean, Ben, you talked about this a little earlier, how like so many of the phase 2 scripts are character, more character specific. But this script is probably best described as an Urska story. Like she's the one who's taking a lot of the active roles, whereas in the TNG episode, the Ian character is kind of a reactive character. He's there, he's inadvertently causing stuff to happen, and he's a focal point of mystery, but he's not himself like, I think the most he does is he goes and plays with some puppies, and that's the big thing he does. But
yeah, Captain Picard admits he's never played with puppies, which is really sad.
Yeah, it is.
But also, I love that about him personally.
Continuity problems for Picard season 2.
Yeah, right. Doesn't he have a dog? Actually,
he does have a dog, but he's making up for lost time,
I guess. But yeah, no, fantastic. And an interesting idea for a alien species too. It's one that I don't think even now we've currently seen. This idea of like the very kind of meta umbrella term of what life is. It's like, oh, this is not just like changing physical form as you see with the Trill or something like that. It's literally like, oh, you start as a physical thing and then you ascend to becoming an ethereal, it's like a metamorphosis into a more amorphous thing. And it's really interesting how they did that.
Yeah, it's sort of what happened to Kes in Voyager.
Oh yeah, of course. That's a great point. It's a great point.
Star Trek's always been fond of little balls of light that were once people.
They're very cheap to do.
So. Yeah, well, they were quite achievable in 1968. To me, I still think, going back to what I said before, Maury Hurley wrote the script. He said he didn't, the TNG one, he said that he didn't read the original script. It's weird because I've never seen a treatment for it. So, I guess there might be one out there, but maybe Burton Armus, who was the story editor at the time, Maury's right-hand man, just wrote him some coverage and he rewrote it based on that. But, the TNG one feels rushed to me. They were at the beginning of the season. They literally were not supposed to be writing anything. I don't think Maury really cared about that. He was complaining about the writers not breaking the strike so that he could give him 6 scripts on the day one. But it's like, it's like Jonathan said, this is not what you expect the first episode of your, second blockbuster season to be. It's a kind of messy episode. It's got lots of different threads, and none of them really contribute to the script. I mean, the Jeopardy is quite kind of an afterthought in the TNG episode, whereas here it's inherent into the story right from the word go. It's like this strange, mysterious metal cylinder starts following them and messing about with the ship and trying to kill them. However much you don't believe they're going to die, but that's, you still had to have the Jeopardy, and I'm sure they could probably have added a few dead red shirts to this to up the ante.
Just have Urska kill some people. It's fine.
Interestingly enough, I mean, neither of the mothers really changes much during the episode. I mean, this what is actually a life-changing experience really doesn't seem to affect either one of them very much. I mean, Ilea at the end is just as happy to see the kid go as she was to get pregnant by some mysterious light ball. And Deanna, mourns a little bit more when her child goes, but we don't really see her struggling to be a mother or trying to deal with this kid that's growing so fast. I mean, we don't really see her very active.
For me, that with the TNG episode is a real failing to it, is that she just she has so few scenes with Ian. She's got like 3 scenes or something with for this thing, and it's like, oh, I had a child, oh, now he's gone, oh dear, I'm very sad. This is difficult, and it has that kind of 1980s storytelling of like, Mr. Burns, we will never mention this again.
But I and you could almost feel Rob Bowman, who directed The Child, seemed to be trying to inject a bit of that into the visuals. How at the very beginning they do that like long kind of introspective moment of Troy looking at the image of the child in the womb, which is clearly taken from a PBS documentary, and just sort of like introspecting there and being, and you hear the heartbeats, and for a minute you're like, oh no, she's gonna get rid of this child, she's viewing this as an intrusion, which is a fair assumption, a totally understandable thing to think. But then she's like, no, I'm going to keep this baby. And then at the end, when she's crying about it, it's like, okay, there's a bit of a arc there. You could read into it if you wanted to, but I agree, it's probably wasn't in the script at all. And like, in this one, as Lisa was talking about, it's like Ilea's kind of almost lethargic through the whole thing. She's just like, yeah, it's happening. Here we are.
She's pretty zen about it. She's very kind of like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, my child will be dead soon, but let me just, I'll get through.
And that's anxiety. That was something I wanted to bring up too. They do mention in this script the fact that McCoy sets it up early on that like Urska probably only has a week to live. Like she is aging too quickly. Her white blood cell count is through the roof. She will be dead soon. And then that storyline goes nowhere.
Yep.
The white blood cells saved them. That's the vaccine.
Yes, but the whole like accelerated aging thing, it's just like it caps at 10 years old, and that's it. And then what's interesting about the TNG storyline is that is kind of a running continued point of mystery, is that like this child is aging before our eyes and we just don't understand how this is happening.
It's just occurred to me that they might have got Jodie Foster to play this role.
That's a good point. That's a good point. They do set up that the child has hair. Which,
she's yes. There are more things in common with Jodie Foster than having hair.
Yes.
Obviously, Jodie Foster was not going to shave her head even in 1975, 1976. But I mean, that casting is such a big thing. There's also a thing about how Urska could be like, there are moments when she seems a bit scary. Yes. There are little mentions in the script about you're not quite sure whether she knows what's going on or not. And you can imagine it having that kind of unsettling kind of alien child thing going for her.
I was definitely reading a lot of The Omen early on when I was reading it, and that's why I tried to go for the creepy voice early, but it didn't work. But it does, it's such a product of its time too. This notion of like demon children, it was all over the place.
It's very
floor cushions. Start wrapping up.
We do, yes. It's about that time. But yeah, so final, I guess let's just do a vote here. Final assessment of the episode. Like, do you vote phase 2 is the better child or TNG is the better version of the child? Ben, let's start with you.
Oh, phase 2 for me.
All right, phase 2. Jonathan?
Well, phase 2, but it is a crime we were denied the sight of William Shatner in his swimming trunks with his tousled wet hair. I mean, took on a challenge for the makeup department there, but yes.
Lisa,
definitely phase 2.
I think I like the phase 2 version better, just because the child is a little more active and sort of becomes interesting as a character herself.
Yeah, it's I wonder how long the episode would have been, because there's so much happening here. And what struck me with the TNG episode was like the script, I imagine, was pretty lean and mean, and then they fill it out with visuals. And here it's like there's lots of things happening, and I'm like, oh, this would have been a healthy 90-minute cuts early on or something. But for me, I'm going to be a contrarian here and vote for TNG. Just because
no way!
I love Guinan. I love the Pulaski scenes. I think they are great, and TNG is my Enterprise, and I just love seeing those characters anytime, any place. Just to throw some love to Pulaski, who doesn't get enough love in the world. So we do need to wrap things up here. Obviously, we want to thank Virtual TrekCon for hosting us, a fantastic organization. And we'll be posting this episode as well on our own podcast feed, which is the Treksperts Briefing Room podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Treksperts BR or at the Treksperts Briefing Room on Instagram. Ben, Jonathan, you guys want to plug your own stuff? Ben, let's start with you.
Oh, we make all these ships. Anybody listening to this doesn't know we make all these ships. I've been wasting my time, and books. Actually, I've been really, Peter knows we've very kind of come on, and we did the original series Celebration book. It's been probably the thing I've been proudest of in the last 6 months, year, how long it's been. That was a big deal for me.
And it's a fantastic book. And it's if you think you've read all the Star Trek books you need to read, you're wrong. And you need to go check out this book too. There's a lot of fascinating behind the scenes images and stories about the people and the situations that you maybe haven't heard of, that aren't the common stories that are told at all the Star Trek conventions. So it's worth picking up. Again, that's Star Trek: A Celebration. Available everywhere. Beautiful hardcover copy. Jonathan, to you.
Well, we've got Star Trek Explorer magazine, which is ongoing, which has got obviously the highlight of every issue is the wonderful fiction, particularly the stories written by our lovely Lisa here, who has just written some fantastic stories for us that are so much better than The Child. If that's not enough, we have got, it's a long way away. It's in June. We have the Star Wars. I said Star Wars. I normally edit a Star Wars magazine and I got confused. Star Trek. Ignore that, right. Delete. We've got the Star Trek Genesis Trilogy special, which is a compilation of interviews and articles about Star Trek's 2 through to 4, which I don't think has ever been done in book form, which is I'm particularly proud of, because that's kind of my Trek. That's my stuff there. So yeah, so look out for that.
That's fascinating.
So where can we get Titan Star Trek Explorer magazine?
Star Trek Explorer magazine from Titan Magazine's website. You can find it on newsstands, if there are things as newsstands anymore. I'm pretty sure there might be a couple around. But generally from Titan, the Titan website, titanmagazines.com.
Fantastic. So again, for us here, thank you so much for joining us. Please find us on your podcast feed, give us a subscribe, send us a positive rating, and you can find us on social medias where we where we post behind the scenes pictures of Star Trek productions, as well as talk to you about our upcoming podcasts, which we have some fantastic guests coming on too. We tend to focus in on getting writers or creatives who worked on Star Trek, or the diehard fans who have then made their own careers of talking about Star Trek, like Ben and Jonathan here. Always a good time, and we have fun. And so virtual TrekCon people, thank you so much again. Obviously want to thank Anne-Marie Siegel and Ryan here, who's emceeing this whole thing. Fantastic times. So for us here, Lisa and myself, I want to say thank you again for joining us. And until next time, the briefing room is now closed.